Hello, I'm going to discuss some of the problems with the poverty measure. Um, so, just to define poverty based on the readings and some of the things that I've learned so far, just understanding that poverty is uh, basically just that basic needs cannot be met in a person or a family. So the way that we measure poverty in the U.S., we often use statistics, especially with the census, and we typically use a four-person or family for a model. From what I understood, they take what a four-person family would live off of with food, and they multiply it times three, and then that makes the poverty threshold. It was somewhere around 21,000 for a family of four, which is very shocking. And yeah, I just can't imagine having two children and a husband and only living off of 21,000. That would be really, really hard. Um, But as I stated in my initial discussion in the intro that my parents raised me in poverty, and I don't know the exact numbers of what they made throughout growing up, but as I got older, I understood a little bit better that it wasn't much more than that. It might have been close to, for a family of six, around, I want to say 30,000, 35,000 in a good year. So it's still very low, and um, right now that it's estimated around 13 to 15% of the U.S. are living in poverty, depending on which source is cited. There were varying answers for this question. So some organizations explained it to expect it to be much higher than other organizations because there were a lot of factors in figuring out that number. So it seems like a lot of what the government calculates was really not too accurate just because of they didn't take some variables into consideration, such as different regions, the cost of living across those different regions, and how much tax deductions there are in different regions. So every place is different with their taxes, every state, um, and then just not considering things over time as much. So it just seemed like it was very biased towards let's just consider this at this specific point in time, and let's not forecast into the future what um, what income and what kind of variance can change over time. So it was just interesting to think about how the government just didn't seem like they were taking as many factors into considerations, whereas some other organizations that were trying to get more accurate depictions definitely considered those things. I thought it was very interesting that the notes were talking about how it's mostly children and women living in poverty. And in my job working for the Housing Authority, I definitely see that a lot. I see mostly young single moms, and um, it's very common, and it's pretty hard for them trying to make it on their own. And some of them have two or three kids, and then they might not get child support, and they are working low income jobs, and they're trying to apply for assistance, whether it be through Job and Family Services or through our program, and it's just not as quick and as easy as it could be or should be. And I also found it really interesting, just the notes talking about how people living in poverty are generally concentrated in a specific region or area, and just thinking about the housing situation where I'm placing people in units that are all like very centrally located, and everyone is, pretty much low income. We have very few people that pay the full market rent in public housing. So, yeah, it just kind of ties everything together that I know, but also kind of is frustrating that men or women and children are being forced to it. So I do like the thought behind Section 8 vouchers, just how it kind of deconcentrates people living in poverty in one specific area and lets them just live wherever they would like, and so it works out a lot better. Um, Some of the things that I think could definitely be done better with this calculation, with the general calculations, I think that the calculation should be examined more often. So people are, or the government or whatever the organization is, are taking a lot of more up-to-date factors into consideration. I also think that something that would be really important is to recognize the working and the near poor, people that are just above the poverty line and they're just barely making it, and they're not eligible for a lot of assistance, but they still need it to some capacity, but they're just not getting as much. But they can't save for retirement, they can't save for a house, so they're just barely making it, and that's, the middle class, the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, and it's not really good for the middle class. So I just thought that was interesting as well. How it seems like that's less talked about, but how people that are just a little bit above the poverty line, they still struggle with most of the same things that people in poverty struggle with. So, yeah, and then I think that like I said, they need to take more things into consideration, such as transportation, childcare, all that kind of stuff, because most people, if they're living in poverty, they have to take public transportation, or car insurance is so expensive. I don't know how people get by. Like in college, I had my grandma paying for my car insurance, and I can't imagine having to pay for that myself. It was so expensive. And so just starting out when you're young and your parents kind of throw you out there, and maybe people don't have the support of their parents at all. My parents didn't really try to help, and so luckily I had someone there for me, but I just think, yeah, it seems like a lot of these statistics are not taking into consideration a lot of important factors that could really, really change that guideline. And so if a person's supposed to work, they need transportation, and they need someone to watch their kids, and there's assistance for some of that, but really not nearly as much as what's needed. Yeah, and I just think that this issue is really important. I wouldn't have thought as much about this as I could have, I guess, before learning about this topic, but it's just so important because it creates a basis for a solution to poverty. I think that if we figure out how many people are living in poverty, and then we can figure out why that's occurring and just guide to a solution, so figure out what we can do to help as people that might want to make a difference in the community, and just in general organizations that are trying to work on that. So I did really like learning about this topic, and yeah, I think that the more that we go on in the class, this will be more relevant, I guess. So hopefully this all makes sense, and then yeah, I would love to hear some of your guys' thoughts about the topic, and any thoughts on how this can create a solution. So coming out from just understanding the measurements of poverty, how we measure people living in poverty, and then that creating a solution. So I'd like to hear some of those thoughts. Thank you for listening.